I will introduce Adrian and Chris Dann, who are, sorry, I should say who I am. David Pullen, I'm Lincolnshire Branch Chairman, but also happen to be East Midlands Region Chairman. And Adrian and Chris Dann, who are Waterways Chaplains. If I've given them the wrong title, they'll correct me when they come on in a minute. And they've joined our committee on our branch, Lincolnshire Branch, and they're in a very good place because they live right beside the Fosdyke Navigation. And we had one of our first committee meetings with them in their garden in the summer, or it seems a long time ago now, when in lockdown anyway, but right beside the bank of the navigation overlooking it. So they're in a very good place to see what's going on and to be in touch with the waterways. So Adrian and Chris have agreed to do this presentation. Personally, I've been aware of the Waterways Chaplaincy for a long time, but not really had any direct connection with it. So I'm looking forward to Adrian and Chris giving their presentation and tell us about their work with the Waterways Chaplaincy. So over to you, Adrian and Chris.
Okay, well, welcome everybody to this talk about the Waterways Chaplaincy. And we will just start by introducing ourselves. As we've already been told, David's taken our thunder. We live and work alongside the Fosdyke Navigation, which for those who don't know, and I'm sure most of you will, but it runs from the River Trent down to Lincoln and then onto the Fosdyke, onto the Witham, the River Witham, which then goes down to Boston on the Wash. So I'm Adrian.
And I'm Chris.
So there's lots and lots of stories go on the waterway. This is one. Many of you will have seen pictures like this, mostly of hire boats, because people are unfamiliar with what they're doing and get hung up on the sill. And the guy alongside just represents how one would feel if one had done that. On this occasion, it looks as though only the boat has a problem, has got to be lifted up, but on many occasions we do hear of pets drowning, we hear of people drowning. It can be a total tragedy, and we'll talk later on about what other things can go on the canals that need help from people. So the first thing is, who and what is chaplaincy? Chaplaincy is neither church nor community. It blurs the edges between the two. Chaplains go out from churches to meet, or it could also be chaplains of other religions, of course. But we go out from our centres and we meet people where they are in the community and represent church or some form of religion to community. So the first thing is, going back to Waterways Chaplaincy, is we are ecumenical, meaning, of course, that we come from different churches.
In Chaplaincy of Modern Ministry, Ben Ryan wrote, "Chaplains are everywhere, operating in every conceivable sector and from every conceivable religious base." And the Waterways Chaplaincy that I know of comes from many churches, including Baptist, Roman Catholic, Anglican, United Reformed Church, Methodist, Independent Fellowships, Salvation Army, and there are probably many more Christian churches that our members come from.
Okay. Waterways Chaplaincy is part of Workplace Matters, who oversee a lot of chaplaincies around the country. And there are links to Church Army as well. If we look at chaplaincy, 50 plus years experience of running chaplaincies. And there are chaplains in lots of places. There's a whole list of them there. I don't need to go through them. And those represent some, if not most, of the chaplaincies that Workplace Chaplaincy has worked with. So we go back to Waterways, our vision and our values. We aim to be a catalyst in the waterways communities to bring about short and long-term transformation emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. When I say catalyst, we try and facilitate something to happen which might not otherwise occur. It can be to bring people to an awareness of God's love for them in a particular situation. It could be to help them contact some other organization because they're not very good at writing things down or expressing themselves. So we're not empire building, we're trying to be salt and light in the community. And the word transformation, we're not just going to give them a sandwich or to buy them a bag of coal. We're hoping through long-term connections with people to bring about an irreversible alteration for the better.
Such, we aim to be pastorally proactive and spiritually reactive, which means we are not overtly evangelistic, but we do offer to pray with or for people if the situation requires it. Again, going back to Ryan, chaplains are effective in large part because they're not like any other services available in an organisation. In some cases, this is for the very simple reason that there are no other services available. In Waterways Chaplaincy, for example, there are very few pastoral or welfare services available for those who live and work on the canals. So that is what Waterways Chaplaincy aims to provide.
And that means, where we can, being Christ's hand and feet to those who we meet, to be a voice, a presence, and a companion to those in need. With the local church. As we've already said, we all belong to a church, but we minister or we work outside normal church in order to seek out the least, the last, and the lost. This picture shows a friend of ours, Angie Baldwin, and it was about 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah, it must have been about that time when she was actually commissioned as a Waterways chaplain. And on her left is her local vicar, that's St. Luke's, Shire Oaks. And on the right is our boss, National Senior Waterways Chaplain, Mark Chester.
Here you see the Archbishop of Canterbury meeting some boaters, some Waterways chaplains, and he put on this on BBC South. He spoke on BBC South. I assume it was the television. The church exists to go to the people, not wait for them to come to the church. And that is what we are doing. The Theos report says chaplains are encouraged and generally on the increase as it enables church to engage with unchurched people and fills a gap in many secular organisations of care for people.
Okay, so let's go back to ourselves and our values.
Our values, motto, strapline, whatever you like to call it, is act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God, which comes from the Bible, from Micah chapter 6, verse 8.
Okay, we have what we call a strategic triangle. The first side, the left-hand side, short term, we're rescuing people. We're throwing a life belt to them, if you like, to improve their well-being, practicalities. The right-hand side, long term, showing them in which direction to swim to get where they want to go, showing them where the dry land is. And perhaps, if we can get to that part, the eternal, helping people understand the meanings of life and responding to questions. We're going to move on to the waterways today, and we're keeping this bit very short because we're sure that most of our listeners today will know at least as much as we do about the waterways and probably a lot more. So, the waterways today. That's a summary from CRT If you want it in English, the top two, it's 1,570 miles of canal and 341 miles of river.
No,
We've been through a lot of the locks. We've been through a lot of the tunnels. We know where some of the reservoirs are. But as for the 65 sites of special scientific interest, the 43 scheduled ancient monuments and the 4 World Heritage sites, we thought, well, that's easy. We'll look it up on the website, the CRT website, and they're not listed. So we emailed them, and eventually we got a list of some, which is a start. They talk about Saltaire, the model village, being one of them, Bath being another, the Liverpool link, which goes from the Leeds and Liverpool down into, I think it's Albert Dock, and the Blaenavon industrial landscape. Now,
and of course,
yes,
the breathtaking Pontcysachta aqueduct,
which many people have a job pronouncing, but we did live in Wales for 20 years before we came over here. So we've learned to pronounce Pontcysachta. So there we go. There are many more, and we still haven't had a complete list from CRT. But of course, all these attractions near the canals attract people to come and see them, and therefore they come in contact with the canals from that reason as well as others. Waterways today. Canal and River Trust with their wonderful new logo. They state that they are for everybody interested in the waterways and making lives better by water. I don't know about you, but I find walking along a canal or a riverside, watching the birds, seeing the, especially in spring, seeing the new growth and the ducklings and everything else, is a wonderful place to be, and it brings calm and tranquility.
Research has actually shown that being by the waterside is good for your mental and physical health.
Okay, let's go back to where we're supposed to be, back to chaplaincy. Who do we meet? What do we do?
We meet everybody. We serve everybody. No, as you can see, recorded contact points from 2019 were liverboards, leisure boaters, anglers, towpath users, Her Majesty's forces, CRT staff and volunteers, marina staff, and the homeless, and probably many others that weren't classified. And
the canal residents living by the side. So there's an awful, wonderful opportunity, awful good chance of finding people, and a wonderful opportunity of talking, because when people are in a pleasant place, they will chat, and we can meet and normally shake hands and say, how are you? At the moment, it's a lot more difficult, obviously, social distancing. Okay, what are the origins of Waterways chaplaincy? We can trace ourselves back, not directly, but this is one of the first boats on the waterways specifically for boaters, in working boaters in those days, when in 1950, Major and Mrs. Fielding of the Salvation Army worked on the Grand Union Canal in their boat Salvo, which they used for various things, including a classroom for canal children. They helped boat people filling in forms, write letters. They gave them clothing when it was necessary. The boat was moored up after the first year in the Coventry Arm in 1951, and it stayed there till 1963, when most of the trading boats had stopped. There is a report from the Salvation Army called Seeds of Exclusion, which talks about 20% of the UK population living in relative poverty. And this, remember, was 2008. Some, it says, migrate to waterways for a cheaper and alternative lifestyle. Well, that's what they think when they first buy a cheap boat and go and live on it. And waterways residents, they mention, are often unsupported. Well, of course, what happens is people think it's going to be nice. They buy a boat, maybe in a spring or a summer's day, and then winter comes. and they get stuck, or they run out of money, or they find they're lonely because people don't mix as well in the winter. And that is where we come in.
And one of the problems about living on the canal that people don't realise is that the structures are no longer there. People living on land have normal structures, they have neighbours, something as basic as having a permanent address, which is important for documents and benefits. They can't be sent because you don't have a permanent address if you live on the canal. Chaplains offer a rare pastoral support structure for people here. And one of the things that people discover when they go to claim benefits or something is the first thing they're asked, what's your postcode? We can come alongside and say, whatever the person on the desk in the benefit office says, you don't need a postcode to claim benefits. You don't need this, you don't need that. So that's the sort of thing that we will come along and help people if they're struggling with.
Okay. So moving on, in 2009, there was a pilot study on the Grand Union Canal from which we developed. That pilot study was undertaken on the Grand Union by Dr. Malcolm Ernst, an envoy of the Salvation Army, and the Reverend Mike Shaw, a director of workplace ministries. Both were keen boaters with a heart for the waterways. And they were on a busy bit of the canals with lots of boats moored up, liverboards, as well as passers-by. It became clear that there was need for chaplaincy on the waterways. And since 2009, there's been an increase of liverboards of 50%. Back then, about 25% were liverboards. Now it's much greater. So the need is much greater. At present,
currently there are around 100 Waterways chaplains. A few are roving Waterways chaplains, so not allocated to a particular place and could be anywhere on the system, but most of us are centred on our locations, our localities. This figure of about 100 was on the 1st of January 2020. And this works out at about 20 miles of waterway for each chaplain. However, our target, as you see, is 200 chaplains, which would make it a more manageable 10 miles of waterways per chaplain in England and Wales.
This target was set at the beginning of 2020, before any lockdowns. And obviously during that time, with halls and churches and other places where you can address people being closed, we have not been able to go out and tell people about our work and the need for more chaplains. So we are now, apart from what we're doing tonight, which is one outreach, we are now looking for different ways to contact people and approach people who might well be in a position to help. So we'll move on to our personal story of how we became Waterways chaplains and what's happening in this area and what we're doing. I was a police officer in Sussex for 28 years. Chris?
I was mother to 2 daughters and then later a nurse working in a casualty department.
I retired from the police force after 28 years in 1996, and we both moved to voluntary Christian work. Then, much to my surprise and possibly other people's surprise, we started a new Baptist church in the town where we were, St Asaph in North Wales, and I became a Baptist minister. So we ran that church in North Wales for 11 years. Then I'm afraid a problem occurred in my lungs and I became extremely breathless and was unable to work. In fact, climbing a flight of stairs became a little bit difficult. Fortunately, after quite some time, the National Health worked out what was wrong and sent me for a major operation down in Cambridge, where after a long and slow recovery, I got back virtually to where I was before it started. If we go back a bit, we've both been boating for a very long time.
In fact, since our elder daughter was 2 months old, she's now approaching 50. Originally, we hired from boatyards all over the country, most years for 1 or 2 outings. And then after retirement from the church, and when Adrian was fully recovered, we decided to buy our own boat, which we used for about 4 years, and then decided to buy a bigger one. The one we now have is a 58-foot-6 braid bar boat. And out of this close connection to the water came the call to be Waterways Chaplains. In 2016, we decided to find a house with a mooring. So set off, having sold our house in North Wales, and found our present house in Saxelby with over 200 feet of mooring on the Fosdyke navigation.
Crossing the country, we won't go into details, but it became a bit of a trek because of an accident. And don't let anybody tell you that it's always safe when you're around a lock. Chris managed to fall 8 feet onto granite, breaking her pelvis on both sides and dismantling her left shoulder. She now has an artificial one. So that put a bit of the pause on it. And we lived with our daughter and son-in-law for about 5 months until she could recover enough to walk and to get back onto the boat. Yeah. Anyway, we found our present house, which is in Saxelby on the Fosdyke navigation. Thank you, my brain slipped there for a minute. And it is the left-hand picture shows it virtually as it was when we first moved in, except that the mooring had at that stage been mowed, which it needed about every week and a half because it was full of reeds, stinging nettles, thistles and other weeds, all of which were about 6 foot high when we first moved in. We'd already got to the area before we owned the house, so we came up from Saxelby to the house and had to fight our way through this jungle. We put up with that for some time, and eventually, if you look at the right-hand picture, it shows what it is like now with completely slabbed for the whole 220 feet, and it has poles with rising rings, which are quite helpful because Fosdyke navigation is not like most canals. It doesn't stay where it is at that picture. It comes up to within about 1'6" of the top of the flood wall at times, and has been up and down like a yo-yo for the last week. Okay, so the Fosdyke navigation and the river with them.
One of the commitments we make is to walk the towpaths. However, the Fosdyke has no towpaths. Much of what there used to be became the A57, and we're not going to walk on that. So we get to boats and people as and where we can. Chiefly, we concentrate on official mooring places such as Saxelby, 14 days except wintertime and lockdown, and Lincoln moorings, residential visitors, official and unofficial. It means we are in contact with about 60 residential boat owners in Lincoln, and a combination of residential, continuous cruisers and hirers.
So what do we do? Well, we go where there are people on or near the water. We've not mentioned the anglers who are always around, especially at Saxelby. Walkers, boaters, cyclists, etc. Well, our job is to be available, to engage in conversation, to build up trust so as to be able to offer help if required. What do we actually do?
Coming back to the pastorally proactive, spiritually reactive, we go out to find people, actively offering help, but only respond to questions. And if somebody wants spiritual help, we will offer it. Our aim is to help, not ram the Bible down people's. Okay.
If you look at the words there, we interact with everybody we can get to talk to. It can be businesses on the sides of the canal. It could be anglers, boaters, walkers, tourists, the homeless. We visit, we get referrals from other agencies, for example, Canal and River Trust, but we also get referrals from our own website. There is a space on our website for people to either ask for help themselves or ask for help from somebody they've met, and that will be picked up and passed to the nearest chaplain. We act as advocates, especially with the Department of Work and Pensions, the NHS, local councils and other, including, I think, probably trying to get people a doctor's appointment if they're not local.
Mm.
We have cards that tell a doctor's receptionist that yes, they may be a stranger, no, they may not have a permanent home, but they are entitled to be seen by a doctor and they're there now, and could he please see them in the next day or two at the most. We mediate between different interest groups, for example, between boaters and enforcement officers. There's often especially if they're trying to serve a Section 8 notice to remove a boat, there are ways of persuading them to talk to each other in a better tone of voice, and sometimes we can prevent this from happening. And we listen rather than leap in with advice. We support the vulnerable where they need it, and we partner with churches and food banks and so on. Our aim is to show the love of Jesus, or the love of Christ, as it says there, and when we're working with people, to pray lots in the background. And there's a little note there that says, did you know? Because we don't record every conversation, but we record if we go out for a walk, how many people we've met, what type of person they are, whether they're a boater or an angler or what it may be. And we separate out meaningful conversations, not just a hello, how are you, but we've been able to deal with them and help in some way. And between the 100 of us, we have, or had in the last year, 3,500 meaningful conversations. It is. This pie chart, unfortunately, the writing is slightly small, so I will just whip through it very quickly. It just shows what sort of activities we get up to. So dealing with finance, dealing with health, dealing with boats and conditions of boats and problems with them, dealing with licensing of boats, dealing with addiction, with homelessness, with relationships, with employment, with crime, and sometimes some of our chaplains have been in court with people who've had to go to court for whatever reason and just held their hands, metaphorically, and matters of faith. So there's all sorts of different things that we contact people with and can help people with. And where we can't help, we know people who can.
So this is a couple of weeks back. As you can see, the water hadn't stayed where it's supposed to be and was about, at this point, it was probably only about 6 inches higher than it is normally. It had been about 2 foot higher. You can see Adrian in the wonderful gilet, in other words, a waistcoat that we are issued with that says Waterways Chaplains on the back so that people know who we are. You can see the boat in the right-hand picture. It's no real access to it.
Apart from 2 ladders.
Yes.
Which is what they've got there.
We talk to people out on the towpath.
Okay, we share the love of Christ in good times. Now that is our esteemed leader blessing the crowd at a Wearboat festival. That's Mark Chester again. And in the bad times.
And bad times includes not only adverse weather, broken down boats, flooding, loss of jobs, bereavement, injury, mental health problems, physical illness. When when I had my accident, we didn't have Waterways chaplains available, but when we were stuck in the beast from the east, we had Waterways chaplains who were just down the canal, and they were wonderful.
That was in Market Drayton. This on the left shows a boat, obviously iced up. Presumably nobody's been in it for a little while, because it's obviously tied up for a winter period. The boat on the right is ours, part of the journey from Middlewich across to where we are now in Lincoln. And that was just after we'd been iced in completely and had to sit still for, it was about a week, I think, just a fraction more. And I'll just give you one interesting fact. When you eventually get free from the ice and get to a water point, it is a requirement that 3 kettles full of boiling water shall be poured over the water point before it will let you have any water. At least that's what it took us. 3 kettles full of boiling water. We did wonder whether we were going to run out of water before it gave us any, but it did work. Okay.
We never give out money to help somebody is, but we have a hardship fund to buy things that they need, only small things, a bag of coal, some diesel, some food, but we don't give them money. But we do point them in the direction of a food bank, benefits office. For if there'd been a boater on this boat, we would have possibly gone and got food or taken them to the shop because we actually had our car there, but other Waterways chaplains would have their car available anyway, so could offer transport to get boat food, but we don't hand out money.
Yeah. And despite being a Christian organisation, we do offer support and encouragement to everybody, whoever it may be, regardless of religion, orientation, or race.
And once again, here we have our strapline: act justly, love mercy, walk humbly.
With our God is the last bit of it.
I'm just reading what's
to
there.
live out our key values. Yeah, I know. So I'm going to give you 2 or 3 personal stories. There will be no pictures on these for the simple reason that we don't show pictures of people we've helped.
Earlier we saw Angie being commissioned. When we moved here, Angie had just had contact with a 75-year-old with terminal cancer. This gentleman was having to cycle with a trailer 14 miles to get diesel and coal for his boat. But he was on CRT moorings where there were electric pylons. So Angie negotiated with CRT so that this boater could get electricity. However, there were problems with it.
Which is where we came in, because Angie couldn't work out what was wrong with his boat. She knew electricity was coming out the pylon when it was turned on, and there was nothing happening in the boat. So Adrian got the job with his wife here to go down and have a look. It's interesting, isn't it, that no 2 boats are made the same. It's not like a Morris Marina or I'm sure I'm the age here.
You are.
They're all the same. Boats, obviously, as you know, are not. Eventually, after hunting around the boat quite a lot, I realized that the inverter was actually turned on for mains to be the charger and provide 240 volt, but the light, the little blue light, which would show it was on, had got a broken bulb. Anyway, found that, and then hunted around the boat to try and find the main switch, which happened to be hidden behind his television. But once I turned that on, he was away. That was fine. He was okay from that point of view, and he didn't have to cycle around a long way. He would go to the local shops, but that was about it. Very sadly, after about a month or so, he died and wasn't found immediately. Police were called, social services got involved. Those who had to do things did them, and the boat was left. Angie took his funeral. Chris and I eventually cleared the boat of foodstuffs and cleaned up where necessary. I'll leave that at that without any details. That was that story. But we were able to hold the service together, and by that time social services had managed to get hold of friends and relatives from all over the country who came down for this service. The other little job we had recently, we had a phone call from one of the boaters that we'd met and chatted to a few times to tell us that on Saxelby moorings there are a couple of campers, young people who didn't seem to be in a very good condition. So we went down and had a look. There they were in this rather large tent, cold, hungry. It turned out that looking at his eyes and the way he was slurring, that the probability, shall we say, was that they'd come out of Lincoln for a reason. They were probably both drug addicts and I presume had fallen out with those who were supplying them, and so they were trying to get away. We managed to dip into the local cafe and might find hot drinks for them, and then get up to the local co-op and buy food for them for a couple of days. They didn't stay any longer than that, and we haven't seen them since. But we hope that that helped them in some way, and that maybe one day they'll ask why we bothered.
On a lighter note,
Yes.
in one conversation with a boater, he commented that he was having difficulties with face masks. They were not big enough to cover his beard. He's quite a large chap. Next thing, I was taking home his old chef's trousers to make him some large masks. And these masks had fish on, very appropriate for a boater. One of the other things we've done while we've been there, we've exchanged books with people who couldn't get out to charity shops, or the charity shops were shut. We've been given chutney. We've been given seeds to various boaters, and we've taken seeds to various boaters. So it's just that sort of building up of relationships, which is important.
Okay, that's the end of our personal stories. We're now going to get to the $64,000 question. How can you help, should you so wish? Well, the first thing we ask you to be is informed, and I'm sure most of you are informed about what goes on the waterways anyway. But you can watch out for information from CRT. You can get to know your local waterways chaplains, talk to them. They love chatting. And you can tell other people about us. I'll tell you how to get hold of us in a minute. If you're so inclined, you can pray for the Waterways Chaplaincy. Without prayer, we don't believe our ministry will be anywhere near as effective as it is or will grow. You could sign up on our website for the occasional newsletter. And if you wished, you could partner with your local Waterways chaplain. So how do you get hold of us? How do you help us? Well, we have a Waterways Chaplaincy website. I could read you the whole thing, but it's a lot easier to just type Waterways Chaplaincy into Google, and that will take you there. There you can find details with photographs of all of us. You can click on a map and it will take you to the nearest chaplain. You can by giving details of which bridge they're near, what the name of their boat is, what their name is, and one of us will go out and see them. There's so many things you can do on that website. You can read all about us. I say the occasional newsletter, by the way, talking about it. The next one's coming out at the end of February. So if you did sign up, there is another newsletter coming out at the end of February, and that contains tales of what lots of us have done individually and all sorts of other useful comments. It also write-ups on different things on the waterways, which might be interesting to you. You could, if you wished, become a Waterways chaplain. The only requirement is for you to be a Christian and a member of a Christian church in good standing. Then you could become a chaplain if you can commit to the minimum requirements, which we'll talk about later.
If you're in doubt about your call to be a chaplain, this book might help you see whether God is calling you to get out of the boat and walk on the water. It's recommended by our senior chaplain as a valuable aid in working through God's work, Call on Your Life. It's about £7 from Amazon.
Okay. You might be surprised to know how many people use the canal.
We work out that it's about 8 million, and that includes 2 million who walk and ramble, 1 million dog walkers, 1.4 million who just stood or rested by the water. Nearly 700,000 of those dreaded things, cyclists.
You just put off half the people who are listening, you know that, don't you?
And 180,000 anglers. There's runners, joggers. There's lots of people on the canal side.
And that's the people that you would have a chance to talk to wearing a uniform of the Waterways Chaplains if you decided to.
And it is estimated 75% of the UK population live within 5 miles of a canal or navigable river.
Okay. We've talked about various people that you might meet: boaters, walkers, anglers, businesses nearby, workers, cyclists, gongoozlers, heritage volunteers. It's a, it's a very long list, and the canal paths in places are very, very crowded. Not everywhere, but in many places. Gongoozlers, well, I won't go too long, but there are people who hang around when things are happening on the waterway, aren't they? Right. Yeah, there's a couple of other things, 2 more slides. We are a charity. You could give money. Relying on voluntary support, our budget at the moment is £150,000 per annum. If we double our number, as we hope and pray we will, that figure will need to go up. But you can sign up to support Waterways Chaplaincy today by going on the website. And if you wanted to become a chaplain, it's only a promise to walk a mile of towpath or more a week, meet other chaplains locally, and attend 2 training days a year.
Currently, those latter 2 are both by the dreaded Zoom.
Of course. We are provided with support, a uniform, equipment, training. We have fellowship together, and we share experiences together. If you did join, you will have induction training, a probationary period. You'll be mentored during that. You'll be licensed. Till we get out of this COVID, you won't be going to the local church to get the church support in a formal service, but that's what normally happens. So you'll be pleased to know. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
Okay, thanks very much, Adrian and Chris, for that summary and canter through your activities as the Waterways Chaplains. I found that fascinating, and that your calling is never more appropriate in these difficult times, whether it be people living on the water or people visiting the waterways. You've made the point very strongly, I think, that it's not just about boaters, but boaters obviously, for various reasons. I think your slide 21 pretty much summed up the current situation economically and socially with a lot of people who have been going onto the waterways.
Yeah.
Just to remind people that if you have specific questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We have 5, and I'll be running through those in a minute. And while people are thinking of anything further in that area, just to say that we've had, as I say, at the peak, we had 60 people on the Zoom call, which is excellent. And some people from Scotland, although I think they were only just visiting temporarily, and all points north and east on the Waterways system. So if I can just pick up on one particular question regarding the spiritual side, if you like, or the religious side. There's a question from someone on the Lee and Stort branch, which is just north of London, as you're heading into Essex and Hertfordshire, questioning, are there any other beliefs, faith systems, in particular, for example, Jewish? Are there any Jewish branches? I'm not aware of that myself, but do you know anything about that, Adrian and Chris?
My immediate reaction will either get a laugh or a groan, in that most Jewish branches grow on olive trees, but no, not to my knowledge.
No.
As I say, we are a Christian organisation, but we get involved with people of all sorts of religions. We have no barriers, but I don't know of a Jewish branch of a Waterways Chaplains.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, of course, there are Jewish Christians. Let's not forget that Jewish is a culture. It's not Jewish itself is not a religion, it's a culture. So
there is a Jewish religion and many people hold to it very firmly, but there are some Jews who become Christians, sometimes referred to as Messianic Jews, or completed Jews, they will call themselves, I think, now. But those who are firmly in the Jewish religion would obviously prefer a rabbi. We actually have one of Chris's sisters married a Jew and adopted the Jewish faith. So we're aware of a lot of things that go on in Jewish circles.
I'm quite sure that if there was a call for a particular need for people to be approached with that background, it could be accommodated in some way. It certainly wouldn't be in competition or regarded as anything to run away from.
No, I mean, we have a Jewish friend, or had a Jewish friend in North Wales, and there were occasions when she was actually a Christian, but her family were Jewish. And when there was a death in the family, she asked us if we could do anything, and we managed to get hold of someone, a rabbi in Manchester.
Mm.
I think the other point to make about that is that it is a support system. The fact that it's Christian at the end of the day is, I like to use the phrase Christian with a small c, although that's probably a one of those things that isn't possible, but it's how you support people rather than what your religious belief is. You answered one of the other questions from Richard, who asked about identity, as how you identify as chaplains. I think you answered that pretty well.
I'll stand up slowly, and then you can see, hopefully, that we do wear a gilet in winter over top of our winter clothes, or without the overcoats and things in the summer. But we also have
polo shirts,
which have got the logos on and so on. Very good for being cooler to wear, but nowhere to put anything in your pockets to give out. So we normally wear the gilets all year round. And we also have caps.
Caps, yes. Baseball caps.
Baseball caps with Waterways Chaplaincy on if we were in a hurry.
Yeah, I think your boats, where they're waterborne, or your boats also carry Waterway Chaplaincy label, don't they?
We've got them on the boat, we've got them in our car, we've got them on our caravan.
Yeah, yes. We've got plenty of them.
We don't leave people in any doubt who we are.
The next question brings me into a thing where you did concentrate pretty much on the canals. There are, of course, the vast areas of the eastern England in particular, which are Environment Agency and others, all the other navigation authorities. And this question from David, who I presume is somewhere out that way, he asks, are you aware of the story of the Fenland Ark, St. Withburger's floating church, active at the turn of the 20th century?
We don't know anything about that, but Angie, who we talked about earlier, is now in that area. I don't know exactly where she is, somewhere near Norwich, but she would know that over there, but certainly I don't know anything about the Fenland Ark.
There are 2 chaplains now working in that area. They both just moved there.
Right, and on the same lines, Peter from Lincolnshire, are you aware of a floating chapel in London somewhere with a movable roof, recently rebuilt? Is it to do with the Waterways chaplaincy?
Again, we know nothing
I
about
would
that.
say no to that. I am aware of one on the Scottish canals, or at least a narrowboat that's just been rebuilt on the Scottish canals, which is doing the same sort of work as we are, but is not part of our chaplaincy. We are not offended.
The question now, sort of right up to date, really, is what's changed since the pandemic? What needs have you had to deal with that are different from before the pandemic?
We haven't encountered a lot, mainly because the boaters we are currently with are residential, so they've lived and worked on the canals where they are. So 1 or 2 said they've lost their jobs, but they've then gone on to tell us they've found other jobs. So we haven't had to deal with anything very much, except making masks for somebody who couldn't buy his own. But I have heard that other chaplains around the country have had more problems.
I mean, that Chris talking about that guy with the mask that he needed. He actually lives on his boat half the time, and the other half the time he has a flat up in Sheffield. And at the moment, he is not allowed to go from one to the other. So he finds that very difficult. And as he said, as soon as lockdown finishes, he'll go and have a change of scenery. People are getting frustrated about not being able to go out so much. But that, I think, is the same as anywhere else. So
Yeah.
a lot of the things that are happening are similar. Being locked in with children in your boat is even tighter than being in a house, obviously. And there are families living on the Lincoln moorings. So they are even more on top of each other than living in a small or large house.
There's a question about is the Waterways chaplaincy self-supporting financially? I think you answered that that it is, but more money, please.
Yeah, each individual chaplain goes into it knowing that there are, as Chris said, there is a small hardship fund. That's the word I wanted. But that is for chaplains to take from after they've already supported somebody else with their own money. We have never needed to go in for that. We are self-supporting financially. I said I was a police officer for 28 years. I have my pension. Chris has her pension from nursing and other jobs she did over the years. And in fact, I mean, I would say when we first moved away from Brighton, I'd left the police force and I had an injury, which was caused by something that happened while I was at work. But because it wasn't one specific incident, they wouldn't accept that it was an injury on duty. So we accepted that. We knew when we went away we were going to have to do some work. 2 days before we left, we heard that the Crown Court in another matter had said that any injury on duty, whether it was identified as one occasion or multiple occasions that caused it, would count. So just before we left, we ended up with another regular lump sum every year, which goes up tax-free. And we took that as being God telling us we were doing the right thing. So actually, I often say this to people, since I left full-time work, I have never done a day's work for pay.
Right. Very quickly then, because we want to finish as much as we can within, it's just gone over the hour, but we'll take all the rest of the questions. A very pertinent one from Arthur. Do you encounter any antagonism from people?
No,
not largely.
because we don't approach people as such. We are on the towpath, we say good morning, and we then take the cue from the other person. If they walk away, then that's fine, that's their prerogative. I don't think we've had any problems at all. I understand that one or two other chaplains have had a little aggro, but we never go and knock on boats or approach people and say, can I help you, in a pushy way. Yes, we'll take a vote from somebody who's coming into a mooring, but we wouldn't be proactive in the way of saying, oh, you look as though you need help. So we've never had any antagonism.
The only one time, I mean, the only thing is we wear a blue uniform. It's not a police uniform, it's not a fire brigade uniform, but it is a uniform in blue. I think mistakes do occur. The only mistake we had was one boater, after we'd helped him moor up, started saying, well, why haven't you sorted out that boat up at the lock at the Trent?
Assuming we were
Canal and River Trust, but that's all. Mistakes do happen, but we've been very fortunate, I think.
Yeah. Good. Catherine, I think his guess is from London, has asked about covering non-CRT waterways, not just Environment Agency, but Port of London, and also non-CRT moorings or non-EA moorings for that matter. In other words, private moorings and private marinas. This lady, Catherine, suggests that there is a huge need of these, what I'd call offline.
Yep. Okay. There aren't yet many chaplains in London. There's a huge number in Birmingham and around that area, but in London, it's only just starting now. We make a point, I mean, if we go into private moorings, I mean, we've got one huge private marina near us, and we've asked permission to go on, but in fact, there's nobody living on board. So it's been a bit pointless. But I mean, we do not go into private property without first asking. Whereas the canals and the rivers, we do have the right to go into. Port Authority of London, I would have to find out about that one. I can find out. Perhaps the questions we can't answer, if they are collected together and sent to us, we will find out the answers, and we will send an email back to Gemma, who can then send it out to everybody who's here.
Someone has answered the question, I think, about the floating chapel in London, and suggested that it's in the Olympic Park. I think that's what Libby meant.
Oh, right.
Right. She just put the London one is in the Olympic Park. I presume that's what Libby meant by that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah. Could well be. We've not been up that way. We've been up the Lee, and we've been from the Regent's Canal up the Lee and up the Stort. About 3, 4, 5 years ago. The Olympic Park by then hadn't been opened, so I don't know much about the Olympic Park. I'm sorry.
And one final point, I think, and there's just one point I'll make from the chat. Libby has confirmed that's what she meant. The London one's in the Olympic Park.
Okay.
And Richard says that there is a book called Canal Boatman's Missions. Canal Boatman's Missions, which is from the Railway and Canal Historical Society. I don't know whether this is a book that's published by them, or that they hold a copy of it. But
right. Well, Richard is a great friend. He's another chaplain, and he's in Birmingham.
All right. And
thank you, Richard.
Mike, who may or may not be from Bridgewater, says that he's given the ISBN number.
Right. Oh, very good. Well, if we get that, we'll pass it on.
One of the other quick questions, which is often asked, is about relationship with the Boaters Christian Fellowship. I think that was what Catherine wanted to know. I know that it's a parallel organisation, but if you'd like to, and lots of your chaplains and lots of your supporters are in fact, members of both. But if you want to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. Right. Well, the first thing to say is we're both on the committee of Boaters Christian Fellowship, so we are very closely linked. Boaters Christian Fellowship was set up initially for boaters by boaters, whereas Waterways Chaplaincy was set up by non-boaters for a different purpose.
Yeah.
But yes, Mark, our boss, encourages all Waterways chaplains to be members of the Boaters Christian Fellowship. And when we go to Crick, we work together. We have the same stand and do the work between us. So yes, we are very closely linked.
I think certainly BCF was before.
Oh yes.
Waterways Chaplaincy.
It's 25 years old.
It was, yeah, it's 25 years old now.
Yes.
We've got about 700, no, not now.
600.
600 members, not 600 boats, but 600 members. We meet regularly on Zoom again at the moment. We've had AGMs on Zoom now. We usually meet once, twice a year for fellowship. BCF,
Right,
if you look online, you can find how to apply.
One final quick question, which I didn't mean to miss out, but it's my system somehow moved the question right to the front of the list rather than at the bottom. And Catherine asks, what links you have with Gypsies and Travellers chaplaincies?
Specifically, we don't. There is sometimes a similarity between gypsies who want to hold themselves to themselves and some boaters who want to keep themselves to themselves and don't want to talk to anybody else. Now that's, I've got to be careful about this because my direct connection with gypsies was as a police officer, and it wasn't always a good relationship, shall I say. I don't know that we have a connection with any
specific
gypsy organizations.
Right.
But we can find out.
We can find out. The questions we haven't been able to answer tonight. We are happy to spend time looking up and finding out and putting on an email.
Okay. A final point of information: the boat in London is part of the local diocese there, Anglican diocese. And some chaplains have hold. I don't know whether it's Waterways chaplains, but they have hold drop-in sessions.
Yes, that's
on the previous boat.
Chaplain.
So that will be the Lorraine that used to lead.
Presumably it's a replacement for an earlier boat. Well, I'm going to stop it now. There's still a few messages coming in, but no specific questions. Some great messages of support all the way through in the chat boxes, and some great questions in the question and answer. So it just leaves me to thank Adrian and Chris for being so thorough in their summary. I'm sure it is only a summary of all that they do for people, and as the Waterways chaplains. As I said, I think in these times of great change and uncertainty, it's nice to know that there are people out there on the waterways ready to support anybody who needs their help. And it's a great privilege to have Adrian and Chris as part of our Lincolnshire branch, but of course their ministry goes, and the ministry of their fellow chaplains goes far wider than that. So thank you very much, Dan and Chris. I'm going to give you a little
thank you, and thank you for all the good wishes that we are getting on little messages here on the chat. So thank you to all those who are encouraging us. It's very encouraging to know.
Yes, so this was a Lincolnshire branch event, but it was very much a nationwide event. We were privileged to host it this evening. So thank you very much, and good night to everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.